Welcome to a very special How It Works with Holger. Today, when this episode is being published for the first time, Delphi will turn 27 years old. Well, actually, I never had a problem remembering how old it is because it's just as old as I am. Well, sadly, that's not the case. However, truly, and these are the facts, it was released on Valentine's Day, which is for all the people in Europe who don't celebrate it as much as here in the United States, which was February 14th, 1995. To me, it seems like just yesterday because Delphi for me has been a major part of my life after school. During college, I made it my job. And so far, it has never let me down. There's still plenty of work. And the number one reason is, and this is actually something I wanted to show you, but it didn't work out. If you write a tiny little application with Delphi 1, the basic principles still work today with Delphi 11. There are no major differences in the basic concepts of the language. Try that with other frameworks than the VCL. The major success of Delphi is rooted in the Visual Component Library, the VCL. And that has been a major foundation, which if you learned it once, you can keep using it from version to version to version, and the changes are minor. And the same goes to the database support in Delphi. You learn it once, T-dataset, T-data source, and even today, it is still working the same way. And best of all, third-party companies like TMS Software are even able to transfer these concepts to the web so that you can write web services and web applications with Delphi with the concepts that you learned 27 years ago. And hopefully, if you're a young developer and you see this from this old guy who wants to tell you a 27-year-old language is still up to date and current nowadays, well, give it a shot. And you will see that you can do a lot of things with Delphi that take you a lot longer with other languages and frameworks. Today I would like to talk about something that we need almost in any application. And sadly, I see that there is still a lot of misconceptions about it. Today we're just going to talk about dates. And to be precise, not at time yet. Time will be a separate how it works, how to use time. Let's focus on dates. It's already complicated enough, believe it or not. So the thing is, Delphi makes it easy. And this is how the development of Delphi can be seen. Delphi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they had already the same date type. But in order to do calculations with dates, in the beginning you needed additional frameworks from third parties. Today, the RTL already has a lot to offer. And that's what we're going to look at today. In order to show you how to work with dates, I created a tiny little VCL application. It has a memo control, so we can show the results, and a button to start our calculations or tinkering, whatever you want to call it. And before we start, let me introduce to you the type that we use for dates. So let's declare a type in our click method and call it LDate as a local variable. But we have a type which is called TDate. That is just the type that refers to date. You might have seen something like date time, and that is the type that can be used for dates as well as time. However, nobody keeps you from using TDate time all the time and just using the date part or just using a time part. If you want to keep it simple, use TDate time. I personally prefer using TDate when I want to indicate when somebody reads my code, oh, just the date is relevant. We're not looking at time here. For example, the release date of Delphi. I don't care if it was released at 1 or 2 or 3, and it was released on different times, considering it was released all over the world anyways. But as I said, time is something we're going to look at in another episode. Let's just look at TDate time, what it actually is. So we click on it, and we see that it's nothing but a placeholder to a double value. And I won't go into the details how this double value encodes the date and time. That is something for an advanced tutorial. We just want to look at how we can work with TDate time. And the TDate is actually just a placeholder for TDate time. So it doesn't make any difference if we say TDate or TDate time. The only difference is, as I tried to say initially, the only difference is you make a clear statement that you just use the date and not the time. It improves the readability of your code. Nothing more, nothing less. So let's keep LDate, TDate. And we have the release date of Delphi. And it was released on February 14, 1995. Okay. And this is already something I'm doing here, which is the end of this talk. I'm using a string to express a date. And that is where, honestly, most problems arise off. Because if you think of something like this, you write 14/02, 1995, and then in some places of the world you write 02/14, 1995, and then here in the US you would say 02-14-1995. So you have different syntax for the same thing. And that is exactly the reason why Delphi internally uses TDate time, so there is no confusion. However, you, as the developer, have to be able to produce something that the user of your application can read. And that's made very easy using Delphi. Before we start, I like to add something to the users clause. I'm uncertain if this unit did exist with the first version of Delphi or when it was introduced, because I think in the beginning there was no clear separation of sysutils and the date operations. But nowadays you can write uses system.dateutils. And in this unit, I sincerely suggest you look at this unit, at least at the implementation part, at least at the interface part, because it shows you what is possible with the RTL nowadays without using third party. You know, I'm a big supporter of third party, but when it comes to date calculations, I always think it's better to stay with what Delphi offers and only use additional libraries or functionality if it is not covered by the RTL. So look in here, you see that you have for date functions, they are not separated between dates and time, so you have to look a little bit. But for example, here you see you can check if a date is valid, if it's a valid date time. You can check how many weeks are in a year, how many days are in a year, how many days are in a month. And you see that you can say for days in a year, there's an overload here. Sorry, I selected the wrong lines here. You have the opportunity to send in a TDate time or just the year as a word in order to get the days in a year. You have no idea how many times I read 365 instead of using this function. This might be true, see 365, for many, many, many occasions. For example, there is accounting standards for bookkeeping that you do not distinguish how many days are actually in a year. You simply calculate all the time with 365. However, if you want the precise number of days in a month, in a year, you have to use these functions. And it's made very simple. You use this library and then you can say weeks in a year, days in a year. You get all that information for free included in the RTL. I guess the most used function is today, yesterday, and tomorrow. No calculation needed. You just call today, yesterday, tomorrow, and you have the dates. You can also check if the date that you have there is today or if it's the same day, comparing two dates. So even date comparisons have become very, very easy. Also, you can check if you have a TDate time, because I said it's internally a double value. So in the beginning, especially with Pascal, for example, you always struggled, how do I get the year of this thing? Well, you have year off, month off, week off, day off, and so on of a TDate time value. So very, very easy. Further, you can look at start and end functions. You might think, why do I need this? Like, why do I need the start of the year, the end of the year? I know it's December 31st is the end of the year. Yes, but do you also have the time? And that's something that is coming into play later on, or like the end of the month. Like there's months that have 28 days, 29 days, 30 days, 31 days. So there's a huge difference possible. So this gives you the end of the month as a TDate time. And all these things, like if you want the start of the week, end of the week, there is no longer any guessing or manual implementation involved. You can use these functions to do all that. And also you can calculate, I just said, oh, it's Delphi's 27th birthday. Well, we better check that, right? So what we can do is we have calculation functions deep below it's nice that they added categories to this. So you can query ranges, spans, but also you can make changes to existing date time values. If you want to add a year, add a week, and stuff like that. We might use ink here to see what is going to happen. But you can also inquire how much time has passed. And where you find this, I actually went down too far. It's right here. You can query how many years have passed between two dates. For example, how many months have passed, weeks have passed, and so on. You also, and this is the first step, because like how are we going to get a T-date if we know a certain date that we know, like it's the second month, February, the 14th day in the year 1995. How can we express that as a T-date time? And here you see two methods, encode date time. That's the one you would use if you want to encode a date plus a time. And there's also the decode, meaning you pass in a T-date type, and here are the output parameters where you can get the year, the month as word variables. And the same thing also exists for different variations, encode date day, encode date week, things like that, but there's also encode date. So in order to encode the release date, I'm going to call it lrelease tdate. And we can say lrelease equals encode date. And then code completion helps us. The year, 1995, the month was the second month, and the day was 14, Valentine's Day. That's it. So now we have our T-date or T-date time of the release of Delphi 1. And let's do a second date, name it L today. Of course, we could calculate with the, and that's actually what I should do, to be honest with you. Simply use today inside of doing the calculation for the number of years. So let's say L years is an integer, and that will take the number of years that have passed between today and the release. So I'm going to say L years equals L release, years between, there you go, code completion helps us, years between now, and that is today, and then is L release. Okay. So you will be quite surprised what the number will be. But remember, today here, it's February 12th. I'm pre-recording this. I'm obviously not recording it on the 14th when the video is supposed to appear on YouTube. So let's see what we get. And for that, we're also going to write a tiny little helper function, which we call procedure log. I'm going to say a text. And the text is going to be a string. And what we're going to do is the log, we're going to say log.lines.add. That's our, I thought log was going to be our memo control. Let's name it txt log so we don't get a clashing name. Txt log .lines.add a text so we can log things easier. can say log, and the text we want to log is years have passed since the first release of Delphi. So we're going to say format. That helps us to replace these things. %d is the replacement for an integer number. Years have passed since the release of Delphi 1. Okay? And then comma. And then we need an array, even though we just pass one value. It's L years. And format and log. Perfect. Save and run. And let's be surprised what happens. So del calculations, poof. 26 years have passed since the release of Delphi 1, which is correct because today is February 12th, not 14th yet. So you should be able now to create L birthday and create a TDate and say, hey, let's create L birthday and encode the date 2022 to, I can't believe it's 2022, oh my god, 14. And then we do not calculate the difference between today, we say L birthday, and release. Okay, so hopefully we get 27 now, otherwise something's wrong. And there you go, 27 years have passed since the release of Delphi 1. Perfect. So I would say this is pretty easy, and if you're an advanced Delphi developer, you will be like, why does he even do this? But believe me, a lot of developers are not aware of this unit yet. They still use third-party libraries from way back that don't have the same level of comfort. So that's the number of years. What happens if you switch the parameters? That's a question I often get at conferences. Nothing, because the number of total years is still the same. There's not going to be, the passage of time can't be negative. So Delphi is doing the right thing. It's switching them, even though they named the parameters now and then, but there's the RTL still switches them. So we are now able to pretty much work with these things. For example, I could also say add TDate, and let's say we add 27 years to the release date. So we say increment, I think these things start inc, yes, increment year of what the value is L release, comma, and then the number of years. So if you don't specify the parameter, it's going to be 1 year because it's inc year. It's named like this for the increment function that we have since Pascal, I think. So the default is 1, but you can also do a different number. So let's do 27. And we should now get this date, right? So let's see if we do. And this is something that I haven't taught you so far. So we can do log. We can do date to string. And that takes a date time. And you can even specify format settings. How do you want your date formatted? And by default, this function uses what your system is set to. So right now, this should be an American setting because I'm starting this in the United States. So date to string add, that's the one we want. And that should be the output. Let's see what happens. And there you go. Month first, then the day 2022. Perfect. By the way, you can also do minus because there is no decrement here. So you increment with a negative number, and then you get what date was it? 27 years before Delphi was released, 1968. Okay, so let's do this, 27. And let's look a little bit deeper at date to string. So if I wanted to have this for Germany, for example, so I can create T format settings. And this type gives us a little bit of a headache. I won't make any excuses for it because it looks like a class, but it isn't. It's a record. And still, and this is what makes it a little bit confusing, I think, yeah, see, there is a function, not a constructor, which is called create. And that, if I explain this in tutorials, like, why is it called create if it is not a class? Well, they thought it might be a good way to mend the way to make it accessible more easily. I don't know. But the key is you can do a createtlocale ID, or you can do a create locale name. And these locale names can, for example, be EN US or EN Great Britain. So let's say it is Germany. So Germany is DE-DE because in Germany we want the German format with the German speaking, and here it is language and country. So the language is German and the country is Germany. And you might think, like, when is it, well, you know the solution, when is it different? Well, of course, for English and US and English and Great Britain, English and Australia. So let's see what happens if we now create a T format setting. So let's create the format, format equals T format settings dot create. And then we use this one, the locale name, and we say DE. Perfect. And now we add that to the date to string function, format. And guess what? This should be now in German format, yes, because in Germany we put the name first. We don't have dashes either, we have periods, 14.02.2022. That is the 27th birthday of Delphi, formatted for a German audience. And that is so important to have in your applications to make your applications more accessible and get rid of confusion. Because if you present a date to a German audience that looks like, what did I do wrong now? Well, date. Oh, it's still running. To a German audience, it'll be confused. It is like, wait a second, it's the second and we have a month of course, Germans know this by now, that the dashes indicate, okay, it's an American date. But entering dates in that way would feel very, very strange. And another thing I always see is that the American date is required to input dates, even though you're on a German system, and sometimes it flips back and forth between the German locale and the American locale. So if you code your applications in a way, always try to use data string with format settings that are tied to the locale of the system. But if you really, really need a certain locale, you can use format settings to force it in a way that you want to. Another thing to remember about format settings is it's not only for dates, it's also for time, and it is also for numbers. So this is also important for string to float, for example, because as we all know, on the European side, we have a decimal separator. I noticed this recently, transferring money between my accounts. Don't ask for the story, but a period and a comma. The US uses the comma for the thousand separator, and in Europe we use a comma for the decimal separator. So these things can all be controlled using T-format settings, and by default, this is always initialized with the locale that is set on the system. That means even if you are, for example, in Germany, you can configure your windows using an American locale, for example. Okay, so that's a little bit of an excursion how to format your dates. Let me do one more thing. Let's do the create without parameters. So the initialization goes into the system values, and then our format has things like date separator, for example. So if you say, hey, my date separator is supposed to be a dash, and then you can do date to string, we still have to, of course, use the format. Otherwise, it's always the default of the system. And this should now give us a date with dash instead of the slash. And also, I think you noticed that the preceding 0 was gone. So you also have like things like long date format, and you have short date format. And date to string, as far as I remember, always uses the short date format. So if you want to create your own custom short date format, you can use placeholders. And these placeholders, you find them in the documentation, are, for example, for the number of days DD, and number of, for the day DD, for the month MM, and the year YYYY, and 4 Ys actually. And these have different meanings. For example, the DD means it's prefixed with a 0. So if you run this, you see 14/02/2022. And of course, I put the date first, so that overrides anything that is set in the locale. You know, so what you often see in databases, for example, is year dash month dash day. So this way now, all the operations that you can hook this T format settings into, that's also possible if you want to. And this is the final thing I'm going to do. If you want to convert a string back to a date time, you need to make sure that your format settings match that. So this is what you often find in databases. For example, 2022-02-14, reverse order year, month, day. And what you can do if you have a string like that, for example, in a comma separated file, the database, hopefully, if you were to use a database, would have it as a TDate time for you. I'm just looking at like, how do you get the TDate time of a string? And let's keep it with this T format settings, like in this format. And then you can use something like, let's name it lconvert, TDate time in this case. And let's do lconvert equals, let's see, well, if we have it, you know, the normal thing would do, if we have date to string, we should have string to, and of course we do. And you see, we also have not only the one with just the string and the date, which would use the current locale of the system. No, we also have one where we can specify the format settings, and that's the one we're going to use. So we're going to say the string to date, our string, is going to, let's try 1995-02-14. And that again should get us the release date. And of course, let's run it without a parameter intentionally, because this should not work. So if we run this in debugging, we should get a exception here. Of course, see, raised exception, class eConvert error with message is not a valid date. Let's break, and we get the convert error. And of course, the line in question is this one that causes the error. And as soon as we pass in as the parameter our formatting, which we changed right here, so this should match, we shouldn't encounter an error anymore. And let's add a little bit more eye candy for you guys. Let's see how many days ago that was. So let's say ldays is the days between, I think is the method called. Yes, now is today. And then is lconvert now. That's the one that we calculated. And then let's log format. The days have passed since Delphi 1 was released. And again, we put in an array, and inside of the array, we put the number of days. Let's see. Should work fine now. No more exceptions. And there you go. 9,860 days, so 2 days more. You will probably, if you run it on the birthday 62. The key here to understand is that Delphi is able to understand this date correctly because you provided the format of the string. The string is year, month, day. And this thing is actually, let's say we take this out, the dashes, and you can do crazy things like that without any issues at all. If you close the application before you recompile, and there you go. It works just fine. So I think I've now given you the ability to go from date to string, from string back to date. And there is so much more, but I just wanted to give you the introduction because there's also things like try string to date, or I think there was. If I can, yeah, there you go. Try string to date, which returns a Boolean value if the date was, and if it's true, the date was valid and value contains the date type. And if false is returned, you know that the date wasn't valid. The difference is you don't throw an exception. So that can help you to convert strings, try to make them dates, and if it's not a valid date, you can react accordingly without having an exception being thrown. So Delphi really has developed a lot in the last 27 years. I think the date utils are a good case to show like there was basic functionality back in the day with TDate time and TDate and all those things. But in recent years with the date utils, you now have everything you need inside of the Delphi RTL in the runtime library that is part of Delphi. And I haven't focused on that, but of course, this is available for all the platforms that Delphi supports, and all, especially for 32-bit, 64 bits, and of course with FireMonkey for all that, because it is part of the RTL. You have this inside of Delphi and can use it in any of your applications. I really hoped you enjoyed this special birthday episode with a date focus. If you do, please give us a thumbs up so we know to produce more videos like this. The time video is definitely coming, I promise. Be sure to have a look at Amazon for books from Holger Flick. I wrote a couple of them about Delphi topics. And also, if you need one-on-one training, support for Delphi, I'm available for you. Just contact me via email, holger@flixengineering.com, or go to the Flix Engineering website. I'm quite sure you'll be able to get in touch with me. So, happy birthday, Delphi, and thank you for your support. See you soon.